Three shapes moved through the tall grass an hour before dawn, low and silent, the way only trained killers move. Kaylee's thorn raised a closed fist. Rook and Vane dropped to a crouch behind him without a sound. Years of shared missions compressed into that single gesture. Ahead, past the last rise of gold-green grass, sat a modest timber farmhouse with smoke curling gently from its chimney. Kaylee's had studied the target dossier for 6 days. Elias Merrick, former Terran Special Operations. 3 confirmed kills during the border war that had been personally verified by Vessari Command. Kills so clean, so silent, that surviving soldiers had given him a name whispered in fear across 2 campaigns. The Quiet End. The file said he was dangerous beyond anything they'd hunted before. The file did not say what Kaylee's was looking at right now through his scope. Through the farmhouse's kitchen window, lit gold by early lamplight, the most feared human soldier in 3 border campaigns stood at a stove in a flour-dusted shirt, flipping something in a pan with theatrical flourish while a small gray-furred cub shrieked with laughter and clapped tiny paws together, and a cream-colored cub stood on a wooden stool beside him, solemnly stirring a bowl with the fierce concentration of someone performing surgery. Rook's voice crackled almost inaudibly through the calm bead in Kaylee's ear. "Confirm target. Please tell me that's not what I think it is." Kaylee's stared through the scope a moment longer, jaw tight. "It's pancakes," he said quietly. "He's making them pancakes." Nobody on the comm line said anything for a long, uncomfortable moment. "The Quiet End makes breakfast," Vane finally muttered. "Command's dossier didn't mention that part." Kaylee's lowered his rifle a fraction, gold eyes narrowing at the warm, golden window and the laughter drifting faintly across the grass toward them. "Command's dossier," he said, "is about to be very, very wrong about a lot of things." Eli Merrick had learned, over 3 years on Halden's Rest, that the secret to a good pancake had nothing to do with the recipe and everything to do with patience. A lesson that applied, he'd found, to almost everything worth doing well. "Tobo, careful," he said, catching the slate-gray cub's paw just before it dove into the batter bowl for the 3rd time. "You eat it after it's cooked, buddy. That's the whole point of cooking." Tobo made a small indignant chirping sound, ear tufts flattening in protest, and Eli laughed. A low, easy sound that had once, according to men who'd served beside him, been rare enough to count on one hand across an entire deployment. "He just likes it raw," Nima said from her stool, stirring her own bowl with grave 6-year-old seriousness. "I told him it tastes better cooked. He doesn't listen." "Runs in the family," Eli said, flipping the pancake in the pan with a practiced flick of his wrist. It landed perfectly, and Nima applauded like he'd performed a miracle, which, given how many times he'd burned the first 3 attempts 3 years ago, felt fair. He'd found them in the wreckage of a border outpost during the final push of the war. A Vessari settlement caught in crossfire that should never have reached civilians. He hadn't planned on keeping them. There had been proper channels, relief agencies, clan placement programs. He'd started the paperwork twice. He'd torn it up twice. Some decisions, he'd come to understand, weren't really decisions at all. They were just the truth arriving a little late. "Uncle Eli," Nima said. She'd taken to calling him that sometime in the 2nd year, unprompted, and he'd never once corrected her. "Tobo says the moons look funny today." Eli glanced out the kitchen window at the pale lavender sky, twin moons still faintly visible in the brightening dawn. "Funny how?" "He won't say. He just keeps looking at the window." Eli followed her gaze, and for just a moment a flicker of movement in the grass beyond the glass caught his attention. Gone as quickly as it appeared. Wind, probably. It was always the wind out here. He turned back to the stove and flipped another pancake. "All right," he said, sliding the finished stack onto 2 small plates. "Eat up before it gets cold. Big day today. We're checking the fence line before the storm rolls in this afternoon." Tobo abandoned all pretense of table manners and grabbed a pancake with both paws. Nima, across from him, cut hers into precise, even squares. A habit Eli suspected had less to do with manners and more to do with a small child's need to control something, anything, after a world that had once taken everything from her without warning. He never commented on it. He just made sure there were always enough squares to go around. "Uncle Eli," Nima said between bites. Old Man Harrow said you used to be a soldier. Before here. That's true, Eli said carefully. A long time ago. Did you fight in a war? Yes. Did you win? Eli considered the question with more weight than a 6-year-old probably expected. Some parts, he said finally. Not all of it. War doesn't really work like winning and losing, sweetheart. Mostly it works like this: you do the best you can with the choices you've got, and you live with what's left afterward. It hadn't always been this easy. The first 6 months after Varenth had been the hardest stretch of his life. Nima refusing to sleep unless she could see the door, Tobo waking screaming at every unfamiliar sound. He'd learned to cook because feeding 2 frightened children something warm felt like the only thing he could actually control. He'd stopped asking permission somewhere around month 8. He'd built a home instead. Outside, the wind shifted, and Eli's attention drifted again toward that same flicker of movement. And this time it didn't dismiss itself quite so easily. Nima, he said, keeping his voice light. Why don't you and Tobo finish up in the other room for a bit? I want to check something outside. Is it the funny moon thing again? Probably nothing, Eli said, which was not entirely honest. Go on now. He watched them shuffle toward the back room before he moved to the window himself, scanning the tall grass beyond the property line with the methodical patience of a man who had once made an entire career out of noticing things other people missed. For 100 meters out, hidden in gold-green grass under a lightning dawn sky, 3 professional killers were about to learn exactly how little their intelligence dossier had actually prepared them for what they were looking at. Inside the grass, Rook adjusted her scope with quiet precision. Confirmed identity match, she said. That's Merrick. 94% facial confidence. And the cubs? Kaylee's asked. Rook was quiet for a moment, running a clan marking analysis, resolving the small notch in the cream cub's ear tuft, the particular pattern of feathering along her spine. Kaylee's. The girl's markings matched the Rannoch clan bloodline registry. Specifically, the branch that was stationed at Outpost Varenth. Vane went very still. Varenth was wiped out in the crossfire during the final push. Command's own after-action report called it an unrecoverable loss. No survivors. Apparently, Rook said quietly, somebody forgot to tell the survivors. Kaylee's lowered his rifle fully, staring at the warm golden window. He had taken this contract on the word of Clan Lord Sarek Rannoch himself. A grieving father convinced the human responsible for that slaughter was still out there, untouched by consequence. The file had described a monster. It had not described a man teaching a 6-year-old how to stir batter properly. This isn't right, Kaylee said quietly. The contract doesn't care if it's right, Vane said, though his voice carried none of its usual certainty. Get Sarek on a secure line, Kaylee finally said. Before we do anything else, he needs to see this. Eli followed her gaze, and for just a moment a flicker of movement in the grass beyond the glass caught his attention. Gone as quickly as it appeared. Wind, probably. It was always the wind out here. He turned back to the stove and flipped another pancake. All right, he said, sliding the finished stack onto 2 small plates. Eat up before it gets cold. Big day today. We're checking the fence line before the storm rolls in this afternoon. Tobo abandoned all pretense of table manners and grabbed a pancake with both paws. Nima, across from him, cut hers into precise, even squares. A habit Eli suspected had less to do with manners and more to do with a small child's need to control something, anything, after a world that had once taken everything from her without warning. He never commented on it. He just made sure there were always enough squares to go around. Uncle Eli, Nima said between bites. Old Man Harrow said you used to be a soldier. Before here. That's true, Eli said carefully. A long time ago. Did you fight in a war? Yes. Did you win? Eli considered the question with more weight than a 6-year-old probably expected. Some parts, he said finally. Not all of it. War doesn't really work like winning and losing, sweetheart. Mostly it works like this: you do the best you can with the choices you've got, and you live with what's left afterward. It hadn't always been this easy. The first 6 months after Varenth had been the hardest stretch of his life. Nima refusing to sleep unless she could see the door, Tobo waking screaming at every unfamiliar sound. He'd learned to cook because feeding two frightened children something warm felt like the only thing he could actually control. He'd stopped asking permission somewhere around month 8. He'd built a home instead. Outside, the wind shifted, and Eli's attention drifted again toward that same flicker of movement. And this time it didn't dismiss itself quite so easily. The official border war records, Sarek said slowly, each word costing him something visible even through the low-resolution hologram, credited a single Terran operative with an unauthorized extraction under fire at Varanth before the position was overrun. The report was classified, redacted, filed under a name I never bothered to cross-reference because I had already been told there was nothing left to extract. His voice cracked. Because I was told there were no survivors. Clan Lord Rannoch, Kaylee said finally. I need explicit orders. Do we proceed with the contract as written? Or do we stand down pending a full review of what actually happened at Outpost Varanth? Sarek was quiet for a long moment. Stand down, he said. Full stand down, effective immediately. But Kaylee's, I need to know for certain. I need to see her. Understood, Clan Lord. Will confirm through direct contact. The channel closed. Kaylee's lowered his rifle fully now, already turning to give Rook and Vane the stand-down order. And that was the exact moment Vane's scope caught movement from a second angle entirely. Kaylee's. Vane's voice had gone flat, urgent. All the earlier uncertainty burned away by pure procedure. We are not alone out here. Thermals picking up a fourth signature. North Ridge moving fast. Not one of ours. Rook was already pivoting, sidearms coming up despite the order that had just come down. Unmarked gear, she said. Scope steadying on the distant shape cutting low through the grass. That's not Rannoch clan issue. That's not anyone's issue I recognize. If Clan Lord Sarek went quiet on a live contract this fast, Kaylee said, already moving, someone inside his own house was always going to notice and decide to finish it themselves before he could call it off. He keyed the comm open again, not to Sarek this time, but straight to the farmhouse, voice dropping into the flat, urgent register of a man who had spent 11 years learning exactly how fast good news could turn bad. Merrick, get the cubs down. Now, we have a problem, and it isn't us. Eli had one hand still on the dish towel when Kaylee's voice cut through the comm speaker Rook had thrown to the porch minutes earlier. Get the cubs down now, and something in him that 3 years of quiet farm life had never fully managed to put to sleep simply woke up. He didn't ask questions. He moved. Nima, Tobo, floor, now behind the counter exactly like we practiced. His voice stayed level even as his whole body shifted registers, the particular stillness of a man who had done this before, in worse places, for higher stakes. Both cubs dropped without hesitation. 3 years of a routine none of them had ever needed until this exact moment. Through the window, low in the grass along the north ridge, Eli caught the shape before Kaylee's warning had even finished crackling through the speaker. A wrongness in how the grass moved, too smooth, too deliberate, nothing like wind. Old instinct, never fully retired, did the rest. He was out the back door and moving low along the tree line before he'd consciously decided to go. It ended in under 90 seconds. Kaylee's and Rook converged from the east, Eli from the farmhouse's blind side, and the operative wiry, mottled brown and yellow fur, no clan markings, a face built for being forgotten. Never got a clean line on the house at all. Vane brought him down at the edge of the property with a single shot to the leg. Not a kill, and by the time Kaylee's reached him, the man was already talking, fast, the particular fear of a hired gun who just watched a job go very wrong very quickly. Rannoch's rivals, Rook confirmed afterward, checking the man's gear for markings that weren't there by design. Someone in the clan's own security apparatus didn't want Sarek reversing course. A live contract completed still would have looked like justice. A contract publicly called off would have looked like weakness, and weakness in clan politics gets exploited fast. Eli stood at the edge of his own property line, breathing hard for the first time in 3 years, watching a stranger get zip-tied in his front field, while his porch's motion sensor kept chiming uselessly behind him. You all right? Kaylee's asked, and there was something almost careful in the question. I haven't moved like that in 3 years, Eli said. It wasn't quite an answer. He was drying the last of the breakfast dishes an hour later. Habit, more than anything, the need to do something ordinary with his hands. When Kaylee's approached the porch alone, weapon slung, palms open. "Elias Merrick," Kaylee said. "Former Terran Special Operations. Call sign, according to surviving Vessari command records, the Quiet End." "That was a long time ago," Eli said evenly. "I go by Eli now." "We were sent to kill you," Kaylee said bluntly. "Contracted by Clan Lord Sarek Rannoch, on the belief you were responsible for the deaths of his brother's family at Outpost Varanth 3 years ago." Something in Eli's face went very still. Not fear, but a deep old grief surfacing fast and unguarded. "Varanth," he said quietly. "I was there." "We know," Rook said. "We also know you weren't the reason it fell." Eli was quiet for a long moment. "I was part of an extraction team. Bad intel, we walked into an active engagement zone that wasn't supposed to be hot anymore. By the time we got eyes on the settlement, most of the defensive positions were already overrun. I pulled 2 survivors out of a collapsed cellar before the position fully fell. That's it. That's the whole story." He looked toward the house, toward the window where 2 small shapes were pressed against the glass despite his instructions. The official record decided that detail wasn't worth remembering. "It was buried," Kaylee said. "Classified under a redacted operative designation. Clan Lord Rannoch was told there were no survivors. Someone convinced him you were the reason it happened, rather than the reason anyone survived it at all." "I tried to find the clan registry," Eli said, jaw tight. "I tried, more than once, to let someone know those 2 kids made it out. Every request came back denied, redirected, or ignored. Eventually I stopped asking permission and just..." He glanced again toward the window. "I raised them. Because nobody else was coming, and somebody had to." The porch went quiet except for the wind moving through the grass. "I still don't sleep on the nights it storms like this," Eli admitted, quieter than he meant to. "Varanth was raining that hard when I found her. I've never told her that part." Kaylee said nothing to that, only nodded once, the particular respect of one professional recognizing what a wound looked like on someone who'd learned to carry it well. "Clan Lord Rannoch would like to meet his granddaughter," Kaylee said finally. "He asked me to tell you he doesn't want you executed anymore, Sergeant Merrick. He wants to thank you." "She has his eyes," Eli said quietly. "I always wondered who she got them from." Inside, pressed against the window, Nima watched with wide amber eyes, one small paw gripping her brother's tunic. "Are they going to hurt Uncle Eli?" Tobo whispered. Nima studied the scene, the careful, open posture of the strangers, the way Uncle Eli's shoulders had shifted from the scary fast movement of an hour ago back into something calmer now. "I don't think so," she said slowly. "I think something's making him remember things." She pressed her paw flat against the glass, and outside, even in the middle of the hardest conversation he'd had in 3 years, Eli managed a small, reassuring smile in her direction. Sarek Rannoch arrived by shuttle 4 hours later, landing in the open field in a modest civilian transport rather than the armored clan vessel his status would have justified. A choice made deliberately, Kaylee suspected, so as not to frighten a granddaughter he hadn't yet met. Eli met him at the edge of the field. Up close, Sarek looked older than his holographic projection had suggested. The particular exhaustion of a man who had spent 3 years carrying grief, he now understood had been at least partially unnecessary. "Sergeant Merrick," Sarek said, voice carefully controlled. "I owe you an apology I don't fully know how to give." "You don't owe me anything," Eli said. "You were told your family was gone. You grieved them honestly. None of that is a crime, Clan Lord. Your own security detail nearly finished the job your grief started. Though, you might want to look into who exactly didn't want you calling this off." Sarek's face darkened at that, filing the information away with the particular focus of a man who now had 2 problems to solve instead of 1. "That," he said grimly, "will be dealt with." "I understand grief making decisions for people," Eli said. "I've made a few of my own I never fully explained to anyone, for exactly that reason." He glanced back toward the farmhouse, toward the window where 2 small shapes watched openly now. The question that matters right now isn't what almost happened this morning. It's what happens next. May I meet her? Sarek asked, voice barely steady. Properly. Not through a scope, not through a report. Just meet her. Nima. Eli called toward the house. Tobo, come on out here. Okay? There's someone who's been wanting to meet you for a long time. The door opened slowly, and Nima stepped out first, gripping Tobo's paw tightly. Sarek dropped slowly to one knee in the grass, bringing himself down to their height, looking at Nima's face for a long moment, the ear-tuft notch that matched a mark he'd seen 1,000 times in old family portraits. Hello, little one, he said, voice cracking fully now. I knew your father. He had eyes just like yours. Are you sad? Nima asked directly. Yes, Sarek admitted. But not the kind of sad that hurts anymore. The kind of sad that means something good happened. After a very long time of thinking it never would. Nima considered this with visible care, then stepped forward and wrapped her small arms around the old clan lord's neck in a hug fierce enough to nearly knock him backward into the grass. And it was here, finally, watching an old man's 3 years of grief find somewhere real to land, that something in Kaylee's chest gave way entirely, the last professional distance he'd been holding on to since dawn. For what it's worth, Kaylee said quietly, stepping up beside Eli. The Rannoch clan doesn't forget debts. What you did at Varenth, what you've done every day since. That's not something Clan Lord Rannoch is going to let go unanswered. And for what it's worth, twice in one morning. Nobody in that field this afternoon is walking away from what you did back there. Word travels. I didn't do it for a reward, Eli said simply. I know, Kaylee said. That's exactly why you're going to get one whether you want it or not. Eli allowed himself, finally, a tired, genuine smile. Well, he said, glancing toward the sky where storm clouds were finally gathering right on schedule. I suppose you'd all better come inside before that storm hits. I make a decent second breakfast, if anyone's still hungry. Vane, who had said very little throughout the entire encounter, finally spoke up. Are the pancakes actually as good as they smelled from 400 meters out? Eli's smile widened slightly. Only one way to find out, soldier. 6 months later, the farmhouse on Halden's Rest had a new addition, a modest guest wing, built at Sarek Rannoch's quiet insistence, so a grandfather could visit his granddaughter without needing to fly in by shuttle every time. Eli still made pancakes most mornings. The recipe expanded to accommodate Vessari dietary preferences he'd spent 6 months researching, and the kitchen table now regularly sat 6 instead of 3 Nima and Tobo on one side, Sarek on the other whenever his clan duties allowed, and, more often than any of them had expected, Kaylee's Thorn, who had quietly resigned his contract position with the Rannoch clan security division shortly after Varentha's true records were formally corrected. And, shortly after the rival faction behind the Northridge operative had been quietly, thoroughly dealt with, a piece of business Kaylee's never discussed in detail and Eli never asked about. You do know, Eli said one morning, sliding a plate in front of Kaylee's, that a retired assassin's rifle isn't exactly standard farm equipment. You do know, Kaylee's replied, that a man with your reputation attracts exactly the kind of trouble a farm rifle doesn't handle. Eli couldn't argue with that. Outside, in the field, Nima was carefully teaching Tobo how to properly check a fence line, a lesson Eli had taught her the summer before, passed down now to a little brother who absorbed everything his sister said with the particular devotion only younger siblings manage. And somewhere in a Dominion registry office 3 systems away, a formal notice was finally being filed, one that corrected, after 3 years of quiet, unexplained silence, an official record that had once claimed there were no survivors of Outpost Varenth. There had been survivors. There had been, in fact, a great deal more than anyone had bothered to look for. Some records take a while to catch up with the truth. But eventually, if you're patient enough, and if somebody's willing to keep making pancakes every morning until the truth finally finds its way home, they usually do.